And welcome back to Outsiders. You're with Rowan, Dean, Ross Cameron, and far, far more importantly, you're with the great Daniel Pipes. Daniel is a historian. He works at the Middle East think tank in Philadelphia. He writes for the Wall Street Journal. You'll have read him in the Australian and elsewhere. An absolute expert on the Middle East, on Islam, and we're going to have a great chat. Daniel, welcome to Outsiders.
Thanks so much.
So glad you're here. You're here in Australia talking to lots of people, and we had a lovely lunch the other day, which is thank you to Ajax for that, and to Bob McGid. Now, there's lots we want to cover. I want to start off with Donald Trump. Now, you are a conservative. You're not necessarily a great Trump fan, but tell us your thoughts on the first year of the Trump administration.
The surprising thing about Donald Trump is that he has governed, by and large, as a conservative. We conservatives were very worried. But if you look at taxation, immigration, health care, the appointment of judges, and other important topics, he's pretty much down the line conservative.
Did you, when faced with a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the lead up to the ballot, what was your, give us your advice to the world in one sentence?
Well, it was somewhat contradictory. I voted for the Libertarian. I could not pull the ballot for either of them. But on election eve, I was rooting for Trump.
Right. Okay.
But I couldn't vote for him.
Now, one of the things, obviously, Trump, you're an expert on the Middle East. Trump has come out, recognised, first of all, he recognised that Jerusalem would be the capital, that the Americans would move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He's now announced that that's going to happen in May. So this is ploughing ahead pretty fast. Now, we've talked about it on this show a lot. This seems to me to be Trump saying, OK, I'm on the side of Israel. I'm going to impose some kind of peace settlement that is on my terms, and I'm downplaying the Palestinian sort of push that we've seen over the years, the grievance industry. You've got a slightly different take on it. Tell us your thoughts on what is happening with Trump, Palestine, and Israel.
I'm inclined to see him as a deal maker. Remember, he's a real estate New Yorker.
Yep.
So the trade unions get this. The city inspectors get that, the banks get the other, and you put together a deal. Here, the Israelis get what they really want, recognition of Jerusalem as their capital, and now the Palestinians are going to get what they want. And Trump has signaled repeatedly, Israel, you got what you want, now you're going to pay a price. We don't know what the price is. There have been various leaks, there's contradictory, but I'm inclined to think that he is, as you suggest, going to impose a settlement. He's not waiting for them. He's going to impose a settlement, and woe to whoever disagrees with it.
And do you think that settlement will be agreeable to the Israelis?
I'm inclined to think they will be very unhappy with it.
Wow. And what will then happen? Because we've got this great kind of love affair at the moment between Trump and Netanyahu. Could that fracture if what he offers the Palestinians is unacceptable to Israel?
I think it well could, yes.
What is the, do you think the unacceptable, is it got to do with Jerusalem, tell us what is your prophetic, recognising we all see through a glass darkly, we make more mistakes than we get right.
Not so much me prophesizing, but me recounting to you one of the leaks, which is that the U.S. government will recognize a Palestinian state, to recognize East Jerusalem as capital. It wants the old city of Jerusalem internationalized. It wants the number of Israeli settlements in the West Bank to be reduced. It wants the Palestinians to give up the right of return, and a couple of other smaller things. Very favorable to the Palestinians.
What do we say? We've got just a slightly eccentric little deviation here, which is an image of a coin, a half shekel is the way it is being described, by the sort of proto-Sanhedrin, the temple movement in Israeli life, who are mainly religious believing Jews who look forward to the rebuild of the temple in Jerusalem. This would be the third temple, the first built by Solomon in about 950 BC, the second funded by Cyrus the Great in, I think, the middle 650s, which was subsequently destroyed by the armies of the Roman general Titus after the Jewish revolt in about 66 AD, something like that. And there's been this yearning, this longing for the rebuild of the temple described in Deuteronomy and such a significant book in the Bible. And so these sort of temple enthusiasts have minted a coin with the faces of a bust relief of Donald Trump and Cyrus the Great. Do you think they are engaged in a fantasy, or do you think it's possible that we might live to see the rebuild of a Jewish temple in Jerusalem?
If that coin merely says, as I understood it, that Cyrus and Trump are great supporters of Jerusalem for the Jewish people, then it's benign. If it is the coin saying Trump is going to rebuild a temple, then I think it's delusional. No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I think they can make their own. Cyrus, of course, is revered by the Jews, the non-Gentile who is described as a Messiah in the Old Testament, and indeed did both liberate the Jews from Babylon, repatriated them to the Promised Land, and financed the construction of the temple. So he's revered as a non-Jew, being used by God to fulfil his purposes, and Trump possibly being seen in the same light.
There you go. You never know.
Is Pipes an optimist about you've got quite a distinctive theory both on Islam, which you see that is Islamism, radical Islam, you see as being in decline. And likewise, you see the mullahs of Tehran seen as being such a significant threat as also being in terminal decline. Why don't you explain to our listeners that theory?
I seem to be the only person in the world who thinks that Islamism is in decline. I date it to 2012, and I point to three factors. First, the Islamists fight among themselves. Look at Syria. Secondly, the subject peoples of Islamist rule rebel against it. Look at Egypt. And thirdly, the Islamists are going out and becoming so extreme and so violent and so horrific that many Muslims are pulling away. Look at ISIS. Between these three, I think it's beginning a decline.
So as it declines, so it declines as a threat to the West, and we saw the Americans recently saying Russia and China are the bigger threat than terrorism. So you see terrorism on the decline. You were actually one of the first people to not foresee, but to warn about the threat of something like 9/11 occurring. You were saying right back before 9/11 that the drumbeat of Islamism was getting so loud that something was inevitable. You now see it on the decline. Will we defeat terrorism in our lifetimes?
Well, terrorism is a tactic. Jihadi violence is a tactic.
Yes.
Islamism is a program, such as fascism and communism. It can be forwarded through nonviolent means, and I would argue to you that nonviolent forms of Islamism are far more effective than violent forms. Violent forms get the headlines. Nonviolent, lawful forms get the results.
Talk us through some of those.
Well, it's working through the institutions, educational, media, political, legal, philanthropic, you name it, that the Islamists, who are properly attired and speak well, managed to get their Shari, the Islamic law program, implemented. Just take one example. A few days ago, the city of New York settled with 3 women who were forced to take off their hijabs to have their mugshot taken. Each of them got tens of thousands of dollars. This
is compensation for taking off the hijab. So they had to take the hijab off by law. The police said this. Yep. They sued, and they've now got 10,000. Whatever. $60,000 as compensation. This is insanity.
That's lawful Islamism.
And
that's not violent.
Right, and that
that's working through the system.
We're seeing in Europe, we're seeing a lot of local councils, governments, London arguably, adopting a more Islam-flavoured line, if you like, laws that appeal to the Islamic community.
Britain is at the forefront of this. You see many major figures in Britain saying, you know what, we've got a British law, and then there's Sharia law, Islamic law, and yeah, why not both together?
And are they compatible?
They're not compatible, but that's really important. That's much more effective than blowing things up.
But wow. Danny, let me put you know, a counter thesis to you. I mean, you have talked about the emergence of Turkey as a real you know, as an understated threat, that in effect, you know, Russia, Iran, in your view, have been overhyped.
No. They're the big ones.
Okay,
I agree.
all right. Okay, then, but one of the issues when we talk about Islam, I say that Muslims around the world believe in their story enough to have children. Westerners don't believe in their story enough, or believe in their future enough, or wish to preserve anything enough to have a child. So therefore, in the long run, doesn't the Muslim deserve to win?
That's an interesting theory. Let me first note that among Westerners, conservatives have a lot more children than liberals. Conservatives believe in their story more than liberals believe in their story. Secondly, the birth rates in Muslim majority countries are plummeting. For example, the most severe decline in birth rates ever recorded is in Iran. Thirdly, there are Western countries where the birth rate's going up, most notably in Israel, where it has gone from replacement of about 2.1 children per woman to 3.15 children per woman. So it's complex.
So talk us through Iran and Turkey. You see that that Iran is in decline. I mean, obviously there's the nuclear weapons, but talk us through the decline of Iran, how you see that possibly unfolding.
The mullahs have been in power for close to 40 years. They have made a mess of it. Everywhere you look, you see the population in retreat, wanting nothing to do with their government. I compare it to the Soviet Union in the 1970s. A powerful and bellicose government going out making mischief around the world, but hollow inside because so few of the subject population agree with this mission, agree with this ideology. And that's what you see. You see enormous social pathologies, drug taking, prostitution, and so forth. You see a population that I would guess is about 85% hostile to its government.
Wow.
So it's living on borrowed time. Yes, it prevailed in 1999, in 2009, and a few weeks ago. It asserted its control, but one of these days it's going to implode.
So the flip side, Turkey, you see, so Erdogan has entrenched his power there increasingly, using, as you're saying, the legal means rather than the revolution. How do you see Turkey progressing?
What dismays me most about Turkey is that not just Erdogan and the ruling AKP party, but the two other major parties in parliament, not the Kurds, but the other two, are all basically on the same wavelength when it comes to foreign policy, anti-Western ideas, and the like. So I think in Turkey, in the space of some 20 years, a strong ally has turned into a strong opponent. And
wow.
We have to figure out what about that.
Just quickly, I want to talk about also Saudi Arabia. You're an expert on Saudi Arabia. The new guy, MBS talks about Mohammed bin Salman and what he's up to. You liken it to a revolution.
Yeah, I do. He's all of 32. He is trying at the same time to change social life, religious life, foreign policy, military policy, you name it, everything. And while he's certainly making mistakes, such as the war in Yemen, this little gambit with the Lebanese foreign prime minister some weeks ago.
Well, we just pause it. A little gambit. Yeah, I mean, what we're witnessing, as I understand it, is one of our allies who just took hostage the prime minister of another sovereign state.
And then failed, and he went back.
And then failed. Yeah.
So what's the story there? What's happening?
Curious behaviour, isn't it?
Well,
talk us through it.
Just today they took a selfie together.
Right.
The Prime Minister of Lebanon and the Crown Prince.
Yes.
It was dumb. It didn't have much effect.
Yeah.
But looking at the larger picture, he is ambitiously trying to change everything in Saudi Arabia, which I believe is very welcome. And I compare what he's trying to do to the efforts of the people behind the Meiji Restoration in Japan 150 years ago, and Ataturk in Turkey close to a century ago. This is big. And if he succeeds, it has enormous implications, not just for Saudi Arabia, but for the world of Islam, because the Saudis are the ones who have been pushing this Wahhabi, this extreme Wahhabi doctrine, and if they don't anymore, lots of consequences.
What do you say, if we talk about Iran, and Iran represents the minority stream, if you like, of Islam globally. We see among the Shiite, in many respects, I see them as sort of like the Pentecostals. I see the average Shiite is more of a believing person than the average Sunni, although the Sunni has this hard-edged ISIS-style Al-Qaeda on that end. But I don't understand, what is the Daniel Pipes view? You've got Hezbollah in Lebanon and indeed in Syria. You've got these are strong and effective international actors who are willing to fight and to die for what they believe. Do you see ever a kind of accommodation between the Sunni and Shiite traditions in Islam?
It's worth, excuse me, it's worth noting that before Ayatollah Khomeini came to office, close to 40 years ago, Sunnis and Shias didn't have that much problem with each other. It was the Iranian assertion under Khomeini that created the current tensions. And it is Khamenei, he's the new ruler, longtime ruler by now, of Iran that keeps pushing and pushing. So long as the Shiites are pushing, the Sunnis are upset. I think this interval of Shiite aggressiveness is coming to an end. I also think that Shiites are not more pious or more observant. If you look in Iran, the mosques are empty. People don't like the form of Islam that their government is purveying to them. They're protesting by staying away.
Now, I want to come on to another fascinating theory or idea of yours, Daniel, and this is the idea that you have labelled Israel victory. I want you to talk us through this. The idea being that for so long we're all familiar with, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, there's got to be two states, there's got to give and take, and what's the peace deal, and there's Camp David, and all this stuff going on, and we're all fed up to the back teeth with it. Your idea, simply, is that Israel should just claim victory, we won, and impose a settlement upon the Palestinians. And is that pretty much where you're coming from?
Almost.
Almost.
Not so much claim victory as show the Palestinians that this long-term conflict is over. The Palestinians have lost by any standard. The Israelis have won, and it's time to move on. It's time for the Palestinians to build their own polity, economy, society, and culture. It's time for them to tend their own garden instead of trying to destroy their neighbors. And I would like our governments, American, Australian, and others, to say to the Israelis, within legal, moral, and practical constraints, do what you need to do to convey to the Palestinians that the gig is up, the conflict is over, time to go home and start building instead of destroying.
Now, you have a lovely image, which is Hiro Onoda, the Japanese soldier who was discovered 25 years after the Second World War finished. He was living up in a tree, still fighting the war on Guam or somewhere or other. Philippines, yeah. And so you likened the Palestinians to that sort of 30, 40 years out, they're still fighting there. They're still up in the tree with Hiro, fighting the Israeli-Palestine war, which was over.
They formally gave up in September 1993 on the White House lawn, but it was with a wink and a nod, and they're continuing it. But yes, I'm arguing that 20-plus years later, they're still continuing a hopeless conflict. Time for them to call it off, go home, do something useful.
One of my concerns about how we reach an end point here is not so much what is happening in Israel, but what is happening in the sort of 50 Islamic majority states around the world, where you have leaders such as the mullahs of Iran, but elsewhere, who rely upon the sort of hatred of Jews and of the state of Israel as a means of consolidating their base of often pretty shaky authoritarian regimes. And they need to be able to hold up Israel as a cause in order to strengthen their own
Interesting point. The Arab states did exactly what you said from the 1930s to the 1980s. For 50 years, they mobilized and distracted their populations by saying Israel, 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 anti-Zionism. But about 35 years ago, they realized this is too dangerous for them, and they pulled back. And now is symbolized by the fact that when Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the Arab capitals went quiet. They called it irresponsible and so forth. But they really didn't want to talk about it. And there's some interesting information about how the authorities, the intelligence services and the like, told the media people, stay off this subject. In contrast, Ankara in Turkey and Tehran in Iran found this fantastic, and they went nuts over it, and they used it to distract and mobilize their population. So I theorize that it takes about 50 years for this anti-Zionism to wear itself out. And what we see with the Arab states is they really want to do business now. Look at Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Emirates, Jordan. They want to do business, literal business. The Egyptians just signed a $15 billion US contract to buy gas. The Jordanians have done the like. They're looking at buying water. This is where the states are now. Not necessarily the populations, but the states. So the era of distraction and mobilization is over in the Arab countries, is now in full fervor in Iran and Turkey, and might well spend itself there as well. In some
That's fantastic, and it's optimistic, which is great. Always pleased to have an optimistic message for our outsiders. We could see the Middle East changing in many, many ways. Daniel Pipes, you can see more of Daniel. He'll be on Peter Credlin next week, which you must not miss. Also, you can go to danielpipes.org and follow Daniel's writings. Daniel, been fantastic having you on Outsiders, and hope you're enjoying Australia. Always a welcome guest to Australia. And thank you very much for today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks. We'll take a short break.